Velez-Mitchell with Unchained TV with breaking news. A New York State farm sanctuary owner faces a possible long prison term after she says two cows wandered onto her property. What happens next is a matter of debate and now a criminal case. There was this week a court hearing, and we're going to hear all about that in a second. But first, let's show you a local news report from the upstate New York area before we get to our esteemed panel, which includes former prosecutors, former assistant district attorneys, and some animal activists.
The drama down on the farm.
These posted signs dot several neighborhoods in Newfane calling for the return of cows that are now living here at Asha's Farm Sanctuary, where protesters are also calling for their return to their original owner.
People are protesting against Asha's Farm Sanctuary, and they're trying to say that we are, cow rustlers. And that means stealing cows. And that is not true. They wandered on to my property.
Tracy Murphy is the president of Asha's Farm Sanctuary. She's been running this safe haven for farm animals for a decade. She tells me these two cows, which she named Little Willow and Ishmael, showed up to her sanctuary around July 16th. She says she called SPCA the same day she found them wandering around.
The alleged owner called me about a week later after the report with the SPCA. And I talked with the owner.
That owner is Scott Gretson. He owns a beef cattle farm not too far from the sanctuary. He tells me he went to feed his cattle one day when he noticed they were gone.
We looked for them and we were advised on the following Friday by an SPCA investigator that they were located in an animal sanctuary. I do know where they're at, but I can't comment on the case any further.
Gretson has been raising beef cattle for almost a decade.
So we thank you for that report. It's a huge issue in that area in upstate New York. I want to go straight out to Nathan Semmel. You are an former assistant district attorney in New York. And the question I think a lot of people are asking is, the cows were ultimately returned. Why is this woman facing up to 7 years in prison for this case?
Hi, Jane. It's a great question. And, I was a prosecutor for 6 years. I've been a criminal defense attorney for 20 years. This is one of the greatest abuses of discretion I've ever come across. The DA's office, even if they believe that a crime were committed, even if they believe that, they have discretion whether a prosecution is proper. And in a situation like this, where the cows came onto this woman's property, and she did what a compassionate person would do. She contacted the SPCA. She wanted to make sure that the cows went to the proper place. I mean, if a child came onto walked onto your property, you wouldn't just give the child to any person. You would take the proper steps, and she's done that. We know that the owner of the cows is a state trooper. I'm sure that's playing a very big influence here. It's not just, I think, a poor use of discretion, but it's arguably an abuse of power. It's really shameful. This should not be a criminal prosecution. It's a civil case.
So there was a hearing, and it was postponed, this case, to December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, at which time we are reportedly going to learn whether it's going to be presented to a grand jury seeking an indictment or will be dismissed. Former prosecutor Bonnie Klapper, famed former prosecutor who's taken down cartels. What do you make of this case?
I'm going to amplify a little bit of what Nathan said. Prosecutors always have discretion. And this reminds me very much, some of you may know about Shark, a fantastic nonprofit, and they really lead the fight against cockfighting, one of their biggest problems in getting the cockfighters prosecuted is that often the owners of the cocks are sheriff's deputies. So obviously they have no interest in being brought to justice. Same thing here. Clearly, there's an abuse of discretion, and clearly it's influenced by the fact that the owner of the cows is or was a deputy. But there's another important legal point to make. Whether or not the prosecution abused its discretion, they are ignoring the law. And I did some research on the statute that allows someone to hold on to livestock that walked onto their property. These laws date back to the 1800s. They were put in place at a time America was primarily a rural agricultural area. And the law says very clearly, cattle wander onto your land. It's no fault of yours. You have the right to hold on to the cattle until such time as you're compensated for the damage they cause and for the cost of feeding and caring for them. And it's very clear that the DA's office is completely ignoring this, because if they understood the law or if they cared about the law, they would not bring this prosecution. In fact, they would be telling the owner of the cattle, you need to pay Asha Sanctuary for the feed, for the care, for the time, and for any damage. The wrong person is being prosecuted.
And these are the two cows in question, snapped while at the sanctuary run by Tracy Murphy, who now faces possibly 7 years in prison. I want to go out to Gabbie Richards, who lives in the general vicinity. This is a farming community, and you sent me some video, which we will play right now and then discuss on the other side, of the protests held not by the animal activists, but by those in the farming and ranching community who are very upset with Tracy Murphy. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, the video we're about to play is shot from the sanctuary looking at a protest by the farming community across the street. Let's play that.
I wish we didn't have this nonsense to deal with. Yep. And he needs a
right.
Very violent people. The state police have this.
This man is the most violent. If there's somebody walking along the road, I would just ignore them as much as possible, as long as they're not approaching us.
It's not his ball program right now.
Yeah, I won't.
So it's
I think they're just
New York State Police that has this investigation. So be patient. We hope that that justice will be served.
All right. So Gabbie Richards, set the stage for us. This is a rural community in upstate New York. I believe it's Niagara County, near Niagara Falls, the Buffalo area. Paint the picture for us. You shot that video at Asha's Sanctuary looking at this protest by farmers? Tell us.
Yes, it was a very intense day. So the days leading up to that protest, the people living in that area had been posting signs that they were going to be having this protest against Asha Sanctuary. So it was well advertised in the city of Newfane, and when the local vegan community heard that they were going to be protesting against Asha, we got some people together just to stand in solidarity with Tracy and be there for the sanctuary.
But what is the mood in that neighborhood, that community?
Right now, it's very hostile. I don't know, you can kind of tell from the video, but every time cars would drive by, they would honk. And yes, they did that while we were there, but they were doing it at all hours of the night. Anytime any of the local community members were driving past her place, they were honking. The rhetoric from the other side was very hostile. They just had very intense feelings against how everything played out with the cows, and they were not quiet about it.
Okay, I want to bring in Donnie Moss of TheirTurn.net in New York, but in a different part, in New York City. One of the signs that I thought was most fascinating, and I'll pull it up, it says free the cows. So this is part of the protest against Asha Sanctuary. What do you make of that? Free the cows, Donnie.
It's a little bit surreal. I mean, I'm really struck by the righteous indignation of all of these protesters. It's almost as if they're out there fighting a just cause. They're protesting because they believe what they see as a commodity has been taken away from one of their neighbors. But you'd think that they're trying to save a rainforest from being leveled for hardwood floors or something. It's just so strange. It's also strange to me that, history will look back and judge the way we interpret these events of today. The people who are rescuing and saving animals are the criminals, and those who are terrorizing them and slaughtering them are the victims. The whole world is upside down. This is a perfect example in my mind of how the whole world is upside down.
Well, I want to invite anybody connected with this case whatsoever. The owner of the cattle, the purported owner, I don't know what the resolution is in this case. The district attorney, apparently there is a new assistant district attorney in charge of this case, which is one of the reasons why it was postponed. Let me ask you a question, Nathan. If indeed this moves to a trial, could she get a fair trial in this community, or would there have to be a change of venue to another community? Because, look at the protests, the signs all over town, utter fool. Here's one. We won. Presumably that refers to the fact that Tracy Murphy was arrested and charged.
Well, we saw that in the Smithfield trial, right? It was shown that, Wayne and Paul could not get a fair trial in that community. And this could be evidence of that as well. Certainly something like this could, taint the jury pool, and it might be best for the prosecution to take place in a different county. Compassion is a real threat to these people's livelihoods. It's not how obviously they operate to suggest that the activists, or in this case, the owners of an animal sanctuary, are the violent people. Just defies logic. So I think a change of venue is possible. A certain legal showing would have to be made, but we could see that.
So Tom Wenzel is asking, why is she facing charges if the cows were returned? The fact is that this is a complicated case. And my understanding, and again, I'm not there. And by the way, Tracy has been told, Tracy Murphy, that she should not comment on social media. So it's not very easy to get all these details. There have been quite a few news reports, and we're going to play another one in a second. But it was in mid-July, apparently around July 16th, that the cows were noticed to be gone or had wandered on. July 25th, the farmer or the rancher goes to the sanctuary to retrieve the cows. It doesn't happen. August 2nd, she's charged. So again, the trial, if there is a trial, if the case is not dismissed, we'll go through and break all this down. That's reportedly, allegedly based on news reports. But what is your understanding, Gabbie Richards, as somebody who's in there and who's a supporter of the sanctuary, as to what exactly went down and why, for example, what was her motive in not returning the cows?
So my understanding of how everything went down is that the 2 cows wandered onto Asha's property, and there is a New York State animal agriculture law that says that if an animal comes onto your property and does damage, then you are allowed to put them in an enclosure and then seek out the owners. And when the owner is found, then that owner has to pay room and board, and also for any damages that may have occurred. So when the alleged owner got in contact with Tracy, they said that they would come on Monday, it was a Friday, that they had gotten into contact with her. Could you hold them over the weekend? We'll come on Monday. We'll talk on Monday and we'll go from there. So then he shows up, and my understanding is that there was no proof of ownership. So very similar to what was mentioned before, she can't just give the cows to anybody who comes forward and says that they're mine. Proof of ownership was required. And then according to this law, the alleged owner should have also paid those fees. And the law reads that you can hold on to them until all of those aspects are worked out. So when she got arrested, it was shocking to us because on our end, from what we see and what we know, there wasn't any proof of ownership provided, and there wasn't any fees paid. So it really all happened very quickly.
All right. And again, we invite the man who says he owns the cattle, who's a New York State trooper, on any time, as well as the assistant district attorney. Apparently there's a new one in the case. Now, here is another news report that does include the man who says he's the owner of these cows speaking to a local reporter. Check this out.
The founder of Asha Farm Sanctuary, an animal rescue and rehabilitation center, and who is seen in this prior WGRZ news story, claims this steer and this heifer wandered onto her property. When they were discovered to be here, their owner, Scott Gregson, gave her a call.
Called her on the phone and made arrangements to stop by her place and pick up the cattle Monday after I found out they were there.
But he says when Murphy then refused to give them back, he placed another call to the New York State Police, by whom he is employed as a trooper. They came with a warrant, took the cattle, and placed Murphy under arrest at the sanctuary, which is about a half mile across this field from Gregson's farm.
How do you think they got there? She says they wandered in. You buy that?
I don't know. I don't know how they got over there. My fence was secure. The electric was on. The gates were all closed. And there were no hoof prints or droppings, so I don't know how they got over there.
Neighbors who for days have posted signs on their properties and held rallies in support of Gregson getting his animals back were satisfied with news of the arrest.
So now you're hearing the other side. And again, that gentleman who spoke to the news media is invited on any time. So Bonnie Klapper, former prosecutor, now you've heard that side. What do you make of this case?
It's a politically motivated prosecution. They have the cows back. She did the right thing by reaching out to the SPCA. She did everything right. And she has a second defense, which hasn't been mentioned yet today. She consulted with an attorney from that area who used to be with the DA's office, and he told her, you do not have to return the cows. In fact, you shouldn't return the cows because that might jeopardize your chance of getting compensation for feeding them, caring for them, and for the damage. So she has two perfect defenses. How can the prosecutor, it is so clearly a politically motivated prosecution, and my fear is that because district attorneys are elected, of course, she can't get justice in this district. She simply can't. And the AD, if any ADA decides to dismiss the charges, you can rest assured there'll be political campaigns trying to make sure that that DA doesn't have his or her job next time around.
Well, in this community, there are obviously a majority of people who are not sympathetic to this sanctuary. Interestingly enough, some of the local news clips we played, those very news organizations, or at least one of them, had done a very flattering profile of Asha's sanctuary prior to this. So, Donnie Moss, you're in New York, but you're in New York City. Upstate New York is a very, very different community from New York City. It is extremely rural. It is a farming community up there. And it seems like the majority of the people in that community have turned against her. Where does that leave the case, Donnie?
Well, I agree. I think that the case needs to be tried in another district. I just can't see how a fair trial could take place there. And again, you put up that "Save the Cows" sign, and I mean, if we're being honest here, that's exactly what Asha was trying to do. I mean, she did, as we said, do the right thing at this outset, and she contacted the SPCA and asked for proof of ownership. And I just don't see how she could have done anything differently than what she did. And so she did her part, and for the community to turn against her as though she's committed some sort of crime, for her to be put in shackles. She was brought out for her arraignment in shackles as though she was a violent criminal, when all she was really doing, I believe, was, I mean, in the end, I think she was trying to get the owner of the cows to sell them to her. I think that's been part of the story. Others might want to weigh in there. As an animal rights activist myself, I could sort of understand how frantic she became when the police showed up and attempted to confiscate the cows on their first visit. Because in her mind, as an activist, as a compassionate person, she knew that just turning them over, she didn't know who the owner was, she didn't get paid, and that turning them over was simply sentencing them to death. So I sort of understand why she was frantic and the sense of urgency. If I was in her shoes, I would have done everything I could to keep the cows too.
Now, this has become such a national case that Joaquin Phoenix, the famous actor, has issued a statement to so harshly punish a woman who was simply showing kindness to two individuals who had wandered onto her property is astounding. I applaud Tracy for standing her ground in the name of animal liberation. Joaquin Phoenix, actor, of course, we all know Joaquin Phoenix. He's a very famous actor. So, Gabbie, let me ask you, for those animal activists in the community, and you run a vegan supermarket about a half an hour away, what has the animal rights community in that area done? Have they held protests? Because I know that I guess it was requested even by the defense, don't have big protests outside court.
Yes, that's correct. We have been advised to not show up for her at court, even though many of us definitely would have. We have really just rallied together to support Tracy in terms of volunteer hours at the sanctuary. That's very helpful to her. Financial contributions, of course, also help her to take care of the animals, and she can't run as many fundraisers as she's able to do in the past. So we have been there for her in that sense.
So, I mean, look, the bottom line of this case is that animals are considered property, Nathan. And as long as animals are considered property, then if you hang on to somebody else's property, there can be legal consequences. Isn't the fundamental problem that these animals are not treated as sentient beings who might actually, yes, try to escape? I don't know. I wasn't there. I want to make it very clear. The man who is the quote unquote owner, according to authorities, says his gates were locked and there's no way. How did these animals get out? But we know that animals escape all the time. We've done numerous stories on it. And so the idea that these animals actually escaped is not even considered. Like maybe they went to a sanctuary, because nobody would imagine that an animal could have that kind of presence. But there are numerous cases of animals jumping off slaughterhouse trucks, escaping from all sorts of situations, and they're all over TikTok and YouTube. So I just want you to weigh in on the legal aspect of that. Animals are property, and property is owned. And until that changes, you're going to see more cases like this.
Yeah, sadly, that's the state of affairs. What makes this a grand larceny charge is that the belief that the cows had value in excess of $3,000. They have to be a thing in order to have value. And it is just another example of sort of the upside down world in which we're living in, that, a sentient being like a cow could be viewed as being worth more or less than $3,000 or $1,000, or have really any monetary value placed on their life. I mean, we wouldn't place a monetary value on each of our lives yet it's okay to do so because because they are viewed as a commodity. It's really a shame. One thing I just wanted to mention, and I agree with Bonnie with regard to the perfect defenses that seem to exist here that make this prosecution ludicrous, is listening to that interview of the alleged owner talking about that his gates were secured and the electric fence was up, and he has no idea how the cows could have possibly escaped. That sounds like a witness with a lot of credibility issues to me. I mean, that really seems to be a nonsensical statement. I mean, I think we know that somebody left the gate open, and he doesn't want to admit that. And while it may be difficult to get a fair trial in this county, I would like to believe that nobody wants a lying witness. So even in a bad county, and I'm just that's a conclusion that I'm not a conclusion, but I think it's a fair inference to come to based upon common sense and his statement.
A couple of things. The implication is that she is a cattle rustler, which is one of the things that's come up during this protest across the street. The implication would be that she actually snuck in there in the dead of night or whatever and removed these two cows. What is your reaction to that, Gabbie Richards?
I think anybody who knows what a kind individual Tracy is would know that that would never be something she would do. I fully 100% believe that these cattle wandered onto her property.
Now, Tom asked, does the ranch owner have security cameras? I think that in today's world, every sanctuary needs to have security cameras around so that situations like this, if there were security cameras, this would be resolved because it's a half-mile walk or trot or distance between these two, the cattle ranch and the sanctuary. So that would have solved everything. So I think that's something that sanctuaries should consider. Now, let me bring up another subject, the cows themselves. Are they alive? Because I don't have the answer to that question. And they are evidence in this case. So Bonnie Klapper, doesn't there have to be an exchange of evidence between the prosecution and the defense called discovery? And if so, shouldn't the cows be part of that discovery since they are evidence? And if they don't exist, and again, I don't have the answer to that, would that also cripple the case?
In the law, you cannot, when I still was prosecutor doing drug cases, big, cartel cases, if there was a drug seizure, we couldn't just burn all the drugs. We had to maintain a quantity so that the defendant could test them independently and contest whether they were controlled substance or not. In this case, the cows are evidence. And unless a veterinarian was allowed to inspect them and take documentation, perhaps DNA, which is when they cut the pig's ears in the Smithfield trial, the evidence has been lost or destroyed. And that will be yet a third defense in this case. My lawyer told me it was okay. The law allowed me to keep the cows until I was compensated. And guess what, government? You did not ensure that the owner, victim, maintained the evidence. I mean, we know when in dog bite cases, the dog is kept in a shelter or a dog rescue until such time as the case is resolved. One of the reasons is the dog is evidence. In this case, the cows are evidence. So letting this, I don't know if any of you know of the story of a phenomenal sanctuary in Maryland called Life with Pigs. It was a very similar situation. Sophie the calf wandered onto the property. Fortunately, in that case, the district attorney understood because very similar to this case, the sanctuary founder called the owner, offered to buy the cows. And what the owner did was start a horrific protest, social media campaign against the sanctuary. Very similar situation. But in that case, the district attorney had the parties sit down and it was worked out, not to the satisfaction of the sanctuary because the cow had to be returned, But the district attorney understood this is not a worthwhile prosecution. In the end, the owner got his property back, and Tracy did the right thing. Nathan commented on the lack of credibility of the owner. It's ludicrous to think that Tracy would have broken into onto his property, stole the cows, and then called the SPCA to report the cows were there. It's laughable. So there are so many defenses in this case. Is this a prudent use of New Yorkers' tax dollars, spending the tens of thousands of dollars it's costing to prosecute this woman who did everything right? And the answer is no.
We invite the cattle rancher who's the purported owner on any time. This case does come on the heels of a very well-known case in Utah where two animal activists went into a giant pig, a factory farm, and removed two piglets and were charged potentially initially facing up to 11 years in prison. Here is a little bit of the opening statement of the defendant, Wayne Shung, who is the founder of Direct Action Everywhere and represented himself and was a constitutional law professor and is an attorney.
Probably already figured out this is a little bit of an unusual case. And I'm going to make things even more strange now because against the advice of my co-counsel and pretty much all the attorneys I've talked to, I'm going to tell you exactly what we did on the night in question. And the reason is because I believe in the people of this country and in the people of Utah to make the right choice. So some things I'm going to admit and say to you right now. I was there on the night of March 7th, 2017. So there's no dispute about that fact now. You will hear evidence in this trial that I was there from me. I did remove two piglets from Smithfield Foods on the night of March 7th, 2017. And we did not return those two piglets to Smithfield Foods after we removed them on the night of March 7th, 2017. While the prosecution has tried to construe these facts as a burglary and theft, that's not what actually the story tells us. And this is where our stories diverge. Because this case is not about burglary and theft. It's not. It's about animal cruelty and animal rescue. So the three holes I'm going to try and put.
So he makes a very strong case. Well, guess what? He and his co-defendant were acquitted on all charges. And this is in a rural part of Utah. So if they are trying to send a message with this case, Donnie Moss, is there a possibility if they do proceed to put it before the grand jury, get an indictment, and go to trial, that it could backfire?
I mean, it could definitely backfire, especially in light of the fact that in the case in upstate New York, the defendant didn't actually commit the crime for which she was charged. She didn't engage in larceny. Those cows wandered onto her property, and she was following the advice of her attorney and following the law, and was slapped with these charges because both the plaintiff, because the plaintiff is a member of law enforcement. It's totally surreal. I can't help but think that if this case was tried in another jurisdiction, that in fact these charges would be dropped, and the people who filed these charges would be exposed for such like this phony prosecution, if that's the right phrase. So, I was struck though, Jane, just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, by the alleged owner of the cows said that these cows belong at home with me and my family. And I thought, how duplicitous and manipulative is that? These cows are going to be slaughtered when they reach a certain weight. To suggest that they're a member of his family is so misleading. If anything, these cows would be a member of the defendant's family because she was going to provide them, or has the capacity to provide them, with a lifelong home and truly treat them like family. It's just another instance of how sort of dishonest this the owner is.
Well, let me bring, and again, he's invited on anytime. We did play his side of the story in the news report where he says, he had all the gates locked and he has no idea how these animals got out. And please come on anytime, and your attorney as well if you have one. We'd love to have you on. Now, one of the reasons it is believed that Wayne Shung in the Utah case, where he and a co-defendant went in and took 2 piglets, was acquitted, is because there was a change of venue. It went from a company town, essentially, what has been characterized in the media as a company town, where a large percentage of the population had been employed by Smithfield, which, by the way, was shutting down their operations, creating even more anger in the community, to another county in Utah that didn't have such a connection. And that is believed to have happened because some supporters of the defendants were trying to leaflet in the original town, and they were faced with this.
You have to have a permit.
Permit for a sidewalk?
Let me get my camera on too.
Sure.
Okay. You're not to
This is not a good look.
You're not to be spreading.
This is not a good look.
You're not supposed to be down here.
This is public property.
You're not to be down here doing this. Do you realize that your company caused a problem in our community?
Do you have anything relevant to say to me?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I've asked you to stop.
Okay, I'm on public property.
You need to stop.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You need to stop. You realize you're not wanted in this community and you've been asked to leave?
I don't care.
I know you don't care. That's the problem with your group. You just don't care about people or anybody. Do you understand? You've been asked to leave.
All of this for handing out some flyers. This is how much promotion.
All of this because your group has been a direct influence on shutting down Smithfield Foods. You don't realize that's the major employer in our county?
You don't think I know that?
There's a lot of people that have lost their jobs, and you come into this community and pour salt into the wounds of the people that have lost their jobs.
It's not the intent.
You need to well, I don't care what the intent is. What you're doing is causing a disturbance in the community.
I'm not trying to cause a disturbance. I'm just trying to have conversations with people.
You are.
And if people don't want to talk with me, I say thanks for your time and on with your day.
Okay. I'm going to stand right here and I'm going to tell people not to talk to you.
Then fine, do that. This is great content for us. Absolutely ridiculous. This is very anti-free speech.
So I played that because it was that interaction that it is believed to have resulted in a change of venue from that county, where the officer probably didn't want to help the defense, but certainly did by making a very strong case that the defense could not get a fair trial in that community and move to another. So getting back to the video that you recorded, Gabbie, of these protests, I want to play it again. It's very short. And I would like to ask people if they believe, the attorneys on this panel, if that would be grounds for a change of venue.
I wish we didn't have this nonsense to deal with.
Yep.
And he needs a very violent people. The state police have this.
This man is the most violent. They have somebody walking along the road. I would just ignore them as much as possible, as long as they're not like approaching us.
It's not in his ball court right now.
Yeah, I won't.
So it's
I think they're just crossing
New York
the
State
street.
Police that has this investigation. So be patient. We hope that that justice will be served.
All right, so let's start with Bonnie Klapper, former prosecutor. Do you think that would result in a change of venue?
You don't even need that. In this case, the owner victim is a deputy in that jurisdiction. That is enough. Any halfway decent district attorney would have already asked to move the prosecution. It shouldn't have to be Tracy asking. The district attorney, him or herself, can move the prosecution to a neighboring jurisdiction, and a good one, an honest one, an unbiased one would, because you cannot have the main witness for the government be a sheriff's deputy in the community. Jane, one of the things that wasn't on the video that you played was that one of those two deputies said to Curtis, the DXE leafleter, "We can't protect you here. There are people that want to kill you, and we can't protect you." That's one of the reasons that the case was moved. And in fact, Curtis and Direct Action Everywhere are suing that police department, that sheriff's department, in federal court. So the fact that the deputy himself is from that district, coupled with the protests, the nonstop protests, and by the way, what hasn't been said today is that people are sneaking into her land in the dead of night. She's calling 911. She's calling the sheriffs. No one will respond to her calls. She's in great danger because, this is gun country, right? Half those people, I'm sure, have many guns. So the fact that the deputy is from that district and the protest certainly would warrant a change of venue.
Well, I have to say, I can't characterize anybody as having guns or not having guns. That we certainly can't confirm that. I can say it's a farming community. It's a farming community, and I think we could say pretty with some confidence that there's a lot of hostility toward her in the community. And maybe, without going into too much detail, you can get a general sense of, as a supporter, Gabbie, what she's going through.
Yes. So I actually saw with my own eyes when I was there, she had a disturbance on her property, and the police were called and a sheriff showed up. And Tracy felt at the time that that particular police officer had a bias against her for whatever reason that may be. And she specifically asked for a different officer to be sent out, and nobody else showed up. So I do not think that she can get a fair trial where she is now.
So what happens now? We're back in court December 27th. And maybe you could explain, Nathan, the difference between just charging somebody and taking it to a grand jury and getting an indictment, because she was arrested, shackled, and charged. And now it seems like the decision that is pending is, will the case be dismissed or will it go to a grand jury for an indictment? Can you explain?
Sure. When a person gets arrested, there are initial charges that are filed against them. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where the case is going to end up. In New York, if you're charged with a felony in a criminal complaint, the accused has the right to have their case presented to a grand jury. A grand jury would have to find reasonable cause to believe that the crime was committed and issue an indictment. Right now, let's hope that the attorneys are convincing the district attorney's office to drop this case. There's still a window for that to happen, at least until December 27th, perhaps beyond that date as well. If they can't come to a resolution, either a dismissal, anything short of a dismissal, then the prosecution will have the discretion to, if they want to go forward on the felony charge, to present the case to a grand jury. They could they could offer a lesser plea, but in order to proceed on the felony charge, they would present the case to a grand jury.
And Bonnie, how do these things work? I mean, how do these negotiations work when, we always see courtroom dramas where it's like approach the bench, but in a case like this, how would they resolve it if the assistant district attorney or the prosecutors are like, wow, this is a quagmire, we want out of this? How would they resolve it?
Well, initially, Tracy's lawyers, and I have to say they did excellent work. Her lawyers submitted a detailed letter to the district attorney's office, laying out the facts, laying out the defenses, laying out the law. The district attorney could read that, agree, and dismiss. The district attorney could simply say, you know what, I can't dismiss because of the political headache or the firestorm it would cause. I'll offer her a diversion or a adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, meaning spend 3 months, 6 months, a month on probation. And if you behave, the charges go away. There's all types of accommodations that could be made short of a felony trial. And there's a sort of a an underlying issue, which for me as an attorney that now works with activists, I had to understand. Most activists don't want to simply get their charges dismissed. They want to make a point. That's why Wayne went to trial. That's why Paul Picklesimmer went to trial. In this case, Tracy's attorneys want the charges dismissed. I don't know if that's what Tracy wants or not. I would think that they are speaking to her and going along with her wishes. But this case could be pivotal and make great law, just like the Iowa case made great law. But it could also be resolved very peacefully and quietly, where the DA meets with her attorneys and they work out some accommodation. If that doesn't happen, the government must produce the evidence in front of a grand jury. And Tracy's lawyers have done something I think is very smart. I've never actually seen it myself in 25 years as a prosecutor, but they asked for the right to have Tracy address the grand jury. Nathan may have seen that because he has more state experience, but they've asked for Tracy to be able to address the grand jury and lay out her defense. That's very unusual, but it could also cause the grand jury to say, you know what? No true bill, no indictment here. There's nothing here that should be charged.
Interesting. And an unfortunate phrase, grand jury can be encouraged to indict a ham sandwich. I'm sure you've all heard that. But every so often, a grand jury elects not to indict. So here's somebody who says, Russell Neal, maintain innocence no matter what. Even if found guilty, there can be a retrial constitutionally. She is right also morally. And I think, no offense, Russell. I mean, hypothetically, I agree with you, but it's easy for armchair quarterbacks to say, go for it. She has a sanctuary. She has many, many animals, and I'll show you some of the others that I've gotten photographs of that are in her charge, that if she were to go to prison, what would happen to these animals? And those are just a couple of photos of some of the many other cows, pigs, chickens, goats, etc., that she takes care of. So Donnie Moss, while it's easy for people sitting in the comfort of their couches and homes to say, yeah, go for it, even if you have to go to prison, it's a lot harder to go to prison.
Well, also, she probably wouldn't go to prison for this and the lawyers could comment better than I can on this. It would be hard to wrap my brain around the idea that she would go to prison, but taking it to trial could be expensive. And if she doesn't have, lawyers who are willing to take this to trial on a pro bono basis, going to trial might not be an option, especially if the charges are dramatically reduced. I can say that I was in a position where I was falsely arrested and falsely charged with an assault that I never committed, and really did want to take it to trial to raise awareness of the issue over which I was arrested. And ultimately, it would have cost tens of thousands of dollars to go to trial. And so I took what Bonnie described as an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal. And basically the charges went away. But a part of me really regrets not using that opportunity to try and get some media coverage and educate the public about the reason I was protesting in the first place.
Yes. And, Wayne Shung got a lot of media coverage, especially when the New York Times not only covered, here's the article that they were awaiting the verdict, but then they covered the not guilty verdict. And they also gave Wayne an opportunity to write an op-ed. And of course, that is the paper of record that the best and the brightest, which by the way was a sarcastic title, read daily. So it was very significant that he got in the New York Times, but he had to put himself at risk of doing 11 years in prison. And, even though it's easy to say, oh, that'll never happen, the truth is, how many cases have I covered as a crime journalist for many decades? I hate to say it, but I was for many decades. 4 decades I covered crime, and you wouldn't believe what people are doing time for. I mean, there's a whole controversy now that there are people in prison for marijuana cases that other people are making billions of dollars over this, essentially the same behavior. So I never say never when it comes to somebody doing time. I don't know if you've had a chance, Gabbie, to talk to Tracy, but I'd like to find out, how is she doing emotionally?
She's doing as well as can be expected. Of course, the animals keep her busy and they keep her mind off of a lot, but it's a stressful situation. And I agree with what was brought up earlier. If she were to go to prison for this for whatever reason, what would happen to the animals? And I think that is on her mind a lot. So while she does have a lot on her mind, she's keeping in good spirits.
Wow. This is such an extraordinary case. And I just want to get final thoughts from everybody, because we could talk about this for hours. And again, we're going to cover it again on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas. Is everybody willing to come back for that? If you're around?
Sure.
Yes. So yes, as we wrap up this hour of live coverage, and by the way, Unchained TV, which also provided more than 16 hours of live coverage of the trial of Wayne Chung and Paul Picklesheimer, we're going to be covering this trial live as well. So please come back to UnchainedTV.com or our streaming network, Unchained TV, which is available via online at UnchainedTV.com, free download on your phone, as well as on Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV device, Roku device. You can watch our live coverage. We will cover this case from beginning to end, and we'll be back on December 27th. So, Bonnie Klapper, you have prosecuted literally drug cartels. What are your final thoughts on this?
Well, Donnie made an excellent point. The system is stacked against someone like Tracy. There's a case I'm working on now, a DXE activist accused of some silly, nothing serious. And we wanted to go to trial, but the cost of going to trial would have just been prohibitive. But what's even more upsetting is that the cost of accepting probation or diversion or ACOD is prohibitive. Lower income people cannot, in this particular jurisdiction, the person charged has to pay for their supervision, has to pay to have their records run. Someone else without funds would just say, I'll take the 30 days because I can't afford to pay for what it'll take for diversion. Someone like Tracy, as much as the movement would like her to fight this to the end, she has to worry, A, about the finances, and B, the fact that if she's incarcerated, who is going to take care of all of these animals? So I don't think any of us in the animal activism world have any right to say, Tracy, you've got to go to trial. Tracy, you've got to fight this, because in a rural county in upstate New York, she very well could go to jail, and then the animals would not have her to take care of them.
And Larry Triple has just said Tracy's financial situation is difficult right now. Please go to Support for Asha's Animal Sanctuary on Facebook to see options to donate to her. And people are very, very happy that we are covering this story. Let's face it, I'm going to give some kudos to the local media. They have covered this. And, that is important. Is the coverage 100% fair? Well, you can be the judge of that. But I do want to say that I am very, very happy that it is getting coverage and that the news media is giving it attention so that people can see what's going on. Not everybody in that community is in the farming community. You might have had 2 or 3 dozen people protesting outside, but the Buffalo area is a ginormous community, and there may be a lot of people who are protesting who might have other thoughts. Final thoughts from you, Donnie Moss.
Here this woman is doing the most remarkable thing, giving these animals who were destined to slaughter, not the cows, all of the animals on her property, a second chance. And she's created a space where people can come from all over the state, the country, to meet these animals. It's free to get in and to interact socially with these wonderful animals who have personalities and who want to live. And instead of being rewarded by her community for offering such a wonderful service, she's now a villain in her own community. It's hard enough to do what she does, even when you're surrounded by support. It's so much work. You don't get a day off when you run a farm animal sanctuary. And now she has the added burden of being surrounded by people who hate her. And so to the extent that we can provide her with support, we should.
Wow. Good points. Let's go to Nathan Semmel, your final thought on this case. For now, we'll be back on December 27th for the next hearing.
You know, I'm drawn to the parallel between this case and the Smithfield case, and particularly the officer that we saw on video. It's amazing to me that when people's sort of way of life is threatened, the extent that they'll go to, including even abusing their power. In the, you know, with that police officer we saw on video just a little while ago, you had people leafletting on a public sidewalk, being threatened by the police. And here you have a situation in which cows came onto a woman's property and she contacted the police. And it turns out that the alleged owner is a state trooper and is, you know, threatened, I suppose, by an animal sanctuary. You have a community that appears threatened, and you know, they not only are not handling this properly, but they refer it to the district attorney's office, who should have dismissed it out of hand. I mean, immediately. This is a civil case at best, and instead abusing its power and prosecuting the case. I am hoping that cooler heads will prevail between now and the 27th and this case gets dismissed, but the parallels are pretty striking.
And once again, Joaquin Phoenix, let's wrap up with a quote from him. To so harshly punish a woman who was simply showing kindness to two individuals who had wandered onto her property is astounding. I applaud Tracy for standing her ground in the name of animal liberation. Joaquin Phoenix. All right, we're going to give you, Gabbie, the final word. You're up there in the community. There has to be a vegan community up there because you're running a successful vegan supermarket about a half an hour's drive from the sanctuary. So what are your final thoughts?
I'm grateful to have been asked to be here today, to be a voice for Tracy and the sanctuary to the best of my ability. It's really nice to hear some legal perspectives outside of our local community. A lot of us in the vegan community talk about this case, and we echo a lot of what was discussed here today, but where we are, we hear a lot of rhetoric back to us, you know, from people outside of the vegan community about how wrong we are, and it's this and it's that. So it's just nice to hear from an outside perspective that it kind of justifies how we've been experiencing this on our end. And I'm just going to echo some of the comments. It's very easy. If you go to Asha's Farm Sanctuary's website, you can actually donate to her farm sanctuary right through her website.
Thank you so much, Gabbie Richards. And I would just like to say my hope, not that it's necessarily likely, but what I would love to see is the community come together and dialogue, argument and counter argument to reach a higher understanding of the subject matter. Let's assume that there's no bad people here, but let's assume that everybody's coming from a different perspective and they're not understanding what it's like to be in the other person's shoes. And what would truly be extraordinary is if out of this drama, the community got closer as opposed to being torn apart. So that might be kumbaya and not likely, but it's always good to throw it out into the universe. All right. Thank you, fantastic panel, for covering this case. We're going to be back for the next hearing on December 27th. Please download Unchained TV. We are a nonprofit global streaming network that covers these kinds of issues. Why? Because they are ignored primarily by mainstream media or covered in a way that doesn't give the perspective of what the animals go through. Jane Velez-Mitchell signing off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.